I had flown 18 hours straight in the simulator the day before. My eyes burned with the specific exhaustion that comes from demanding excellence from yourself. Now, I just wanted silence. I had earned this ticket. It was first class, seat 1A. It cost me half a week's salary, but it was more than money. It was a promise I made to myself years ago. I would never settle for less than the respect I deserved. I walked up to gate D12. The gate sign glowed, listing flight 601 to Zurich. The reserved first-class carpet felt mocking under my travel shoes. The gate agent, a woman with stiff blonde hair and a name badge reading Brenda, barely glanced at me. Her expression was set in a mold of bored cynicism. I handed her the pristine ticket. It was thick cardstock, heavy in my hand, signifying luxury and priority. She didn't scan it immediately. She held it up to the harsh airport light, turning it over and back, treating it like a bill she suspected was counterfeit. "Ma'am," she started, her voice dry, immediately heavy with suspicion. "This is first class." "I know," I replied, my voice perfectly level, calm despite the immediate tension. "That's why I'm here." Then came the pause. It was the pregnant, humiliating silence where she waited for me to stutter, to confess to having made a mistake, to admit I was lost. She looked me up and down. My clothes were expensive but not flashy. My hair was pulled back tightly. I looked tired. I looked, to her, like someone who didn't belong. "There must be an error," she announced, the announcement echoing slightly in the quiet boarding area. "We only have 2 seats left, and they are reserved for executive status flyers, confirmed high-level clients." My jaw tightened. "My ticket states 1A. It is executive status. I booked it last month through the Platinum portal." I reached inside my bag. My official identification was tucked safely beneath my civilian license. My uniform jacket was folded neatly nearby. I didn't show them yet. Not yet. Before Brenda could even open her mouth to argue, a loud, booming voice interrupted us. A man in a custom-tailored gray suit, Mr. Henderson, according to his expensive lapel pin, pushed past the stanchion ropes. He was agitated, puffing slightly. "Good grief, Brenda! Is there a problem here?" he demanded, leaning dramatically over the counter. "We need to board. We have serious business to attend to in Zurich. Can we move this along?" He eyed me, the appraisal cold and swift. He saw my tiredness, my skin, the slight tension in my shoulders. "Look," Mr. Henderson continued, shaking his head with an air of profound annoyance. "Just put her in economy, dear. If there was a system glitch, we don't need this confusion up front. We paid good money for peace and efficiency up here." The collective weight of their judgment was instant and sharp. I felt the familiar burn, the quiet shame of being deemed an intruder, simply for standing where I was allowed to stand. I saw myself through their eyes, an anomaly, a mistake in the system that needed immediate correction. Brenda's hesitation vanished. She was validated. She picked up the airport phone, dialing quickly. She spoke in low, hushed tones, but her eyes never left mine, a predator watching its prey. She hung up the receiver. A small, cruel, triumphant smirk played on her lips. "Ma'am, I have confirmation," she announced, raising her voice just enough for Mr. Henderson and the 3 other waiting first-class passengers to hear. "There has been a system override." She leaned in, lowering her voice in a way that was meant to simulate concern, but only served to amplify her power. "We apologize for the inconvenience, but your ticket has been downgraded, effective immediately." My breath hitched. Downgraded? On what grounds? I wasn't arguing about the money. I was fighting the principle. This was not about the seat. It was about their power to decide where I belonged. "Grounds of necessity," Brenda snapped, her false sympathy melting away. Your previous reservation status couldn't be confirmed. The seat is required for a paying validated client. Someone we can trust will not cause turbulence. Mr. Henderson coughed loudly, a noise of superior approval. Then Brenda performed the act that broke my stillness. It was the physical manifestation of their disdain. She didn't just void the ticket in the system. She took the pristine, heavy cardstock ticket for 1A, held it firmly against the counter's edge, and tore it cleanly and deliberately in half, right down the elegant gold spine. The sound was sharp, brittle, and final. It echoed in my chest. "There," she said, dropping the two useless pieces into the small locked recycling bin behind the desk. "Problem solved." She printed a replacement ticket on thin, flimsy thermal paper. She slid it across the counter with a flick of her wrist. "Seat 48F, the back row, right near the lavatory." The final insult. My breath stalled. The humiliation was physical, reaching from my stomach to my throat. It was a slap, a denial of my reality. I looked down at the pathetic replacement ticket. I looked back at Brenda's smug, satisfied face. I looked past her to Mr. Henderson, who was now checking his expensive watch, completely dismissing me. I felt the heat rising in my core, the years of quiet ambition and relentless hard work suddenly burning the rage into absolute, dignified ice. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I picked up the 48F ticket. "Thank you for the clarification," I said softly, the words barely a whisper. They heard only submission. I heard only a promise. I turned and walked away from gate D12. I did not head toward the main boarding line, where the downgraded passengers were queuing. I kept walking, past the duty-free shops, past the public eye. I headed toward the discreet, unmarked employee access corridor near the escalators, a door that only a select few were authorized to use. They thought they had reduced me to 48F. They thought they had dismissed me entirely from their rarefied world. They had no idea that their first-class flight, the one they paid so much money for, the one they required peace and efficiency on, could not lift a single wheel off the runway without the woman they had just thrown away. I stopped at the service lift entrance, which was hidden behind a bland metal panel. I scanned my credentials. The door hissed open. I didn't push the button for the terminal gate or even the lounge. I pushed the button marked Flight Operations and Cockpit Crew. The first part of my journey, the injustice, was complete. Now the real flight was about to begin. The ticket stub, still jagged where she tore it, lay on the counter between us. Sarah, the gate agent, adjusted her plastic badge. Her expression wasn't one of confusion anymore. It was certainty. The certainty of someone who knew they were right and couldn't fathom a challenge. "Ma'am, I've already explained. This ticket is invalid. I need you to step aside, or I will call airport security." I felt the blood rush to my face hot and thick. This wasn't just a mistake. This was an accusation. "It is not invalid," I said, keeping my voice low. The training kicked in. The decades spent navigating male-dominated cockpits. Stay professional. Stay calm. "The booking is confirmed. I have the digital receipt right here." I pulled out my phone, but she didn't even look. She focused on the expensive carry-on bag at my feet, the one that screamed business travel, not first class. In her mind, the contradiction was proof. "You may have booked a ticket, but not this seat," she insisted, her voice gaining an edge of righteous annoyance. People try to upgrade last minute all the time, but tearing up a fraudulent receipt doesn't make it real. A small cluster of passengers had gathered behind me, shifting their weight impatiently. Whispers started, buzzing like angry flies. I heard fragments: delay, trouble, security. Then a man in a crisp linen suit stepped forward, leaning in with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had the air of someone accustomed to being heard. "Look, Just move her along, all right? Some of us have connecting flights. Whatever this is, it can wait. If she can't afford the seat, she shouldn't be holding up the rest of us who can. The words hit me like physical blows. If she can't afford the seat, every single moment of sacrifice, every early morning, every grueling simulator session, every fight for respect in a flight deck where I was often the only black face, the only woman, it was all condensed into that one arrogant dismissal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that my salary probably financed his entire itinerary. I wanted to remind him that his life and the lives of 300 others would soon depend entirely on my judgment. But I closed my mouth. I tasted the copper bitterness of restraint. Sarah clearly appreciated the reinforcement. She stood taller. Sir, we are handling it. Ma'am, you need to decide. Either you accept a standard economy ticket, provided we have availability, or you forfeit the fare and exit the gate. The audacity was staggering. They were offering me charity after robbing me of dignity and property. I need to speak to your supervisor. Now, I demanded, the professionalism finally cracking, leaving a sharp edge of command in my voice. Sarah frowned, momentarily thrown by the sudden shift in tone. She reluctantly picked up the gate phone, dialing 3 numbers. Supervisor required at gate 14. We have a discrepancy with a passenger attempting to board first class. She paused, her eyes tracing my features with disdain. Yes, the passenger is uncooperative. While we waited, the man in the linen suit sighed dramatically, pulling out his phone. Honestly, the entitlement these days is incredible. You pay good money for premium service, and you get this kind of disruption. His friend chuckled. Trying to punch above her weight class, it looks like. My hands curled into fists deep inside the pockets of my light jacket. I was not just Amara, the person. I was Captain Amara Johnson, highly decorated, 15,000 hours logged. I had flown through storms they only saw on TV. I had handled emergencies that would make these people faint. My pride demanded I pull out my official identification, show them the weight of my position, force them to grovel. But the captain in me understood leverage. If I revealed myself now, they would issue a stuttering apology, blame a system error, and quickly usher me to my seat, smoothing everything over. They would escape the consequence of their fundamental, damaging assumption. No, they needed to see what they did to someone they perceived as powerless. I thought of the cold glass wall of the terminal, reflecting my image. A successful, tired black woman, being treated like a thief in broad daylight. This wasn't about a seat. This was about their deeply ingrained belief that someone like me simply did not belong in that space of privilege, quality, or power. A tall, stiff woman in a crisp blazer and serious glasses arrived. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at Sarah. What's the problem? Sarah immediately launched into her rehearsed explanation, pointing dramatically to the torn ticket. She insists that this is a valid first-class booking. Supervisor. But her mannerisms, her luggage, nothing aligns. I believe she is attempting to use a voided ticket or perhaps one belonging to someone else. The supervisor, a woman named Miss Davies, finally turned to me. Her gaze was swift and assessing, confirming Sarah's negative assumption in a fraction of a second. No greeting, no apology for the delay. Ma'am, you cannot board the flight with the ticket deemed void by the gate agent. This is final. If you feel you were wrongly charged, you must contact customer service or after the flight. She gestured toward the open jetway door. We are already 5 minutes past scheduled pushback. You will either accept the economy seat we have allocated, row 45, far aisle, or we will process you for non-compliance. Row 45. The seat designed for maximum noise, minimal space, and the smell of the rear galley, the plane I was about to command. The irony was a razor blade slicing through my gut. I took a deep, steadying breath. I looked Miss Davies dead in the eye, my training overriding the fire in my chest. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I accept the economy seat, I stated clearly, but I want both your names and badge numbers. And I want a full written report of this incident, detailing the reason for the downgrade and the destruction of my property. Miss Davies merely waved a dismissive hand. We will provide the incident report later, via email. Get her boarding pass for 45A, Sarah. Sarah printed the new, cheap, flimsy paper ticket. She slapped it onto the counter. I picked it up, feeling the contrast between the thick cardstock of the first-class ticket, now ripped, and this sad piece of paper. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Davies said, a phrase devoid of actual gratitude. I didn't answer. I walked past them, past the impatient passengers, and into the jetway. My stomach twisted with the knowledge that I had to parade through the very cabin they had denied me. The lighting was softer inside the first-class cabin. Everything was polished wood and quiet luxury. The linen suit man smiled slightly as I walked by his enormous seat, clearly delighted to see me heading toward the back. He had won. They had confirmed his bias. I kept my eyes fixed forward. The professional shell I had built over 2 decades hardened around me. I was not humiliated. I was observing. I was collecting data. I reached the narrow aisle of economy. The air changed, becoming tighter, louder. I finally found 45A, squeezed between a crying baby and an elderly gentleman already asleep against the window. I jammed my small carry-on bag into the overhead bin, the metal clanging sharply. Then I sat down. 45A, my assigned seat for the next 6 hours. I pulled out my phone. It was 9:45 a.m. Scheduled pushback, 9:50 a.m. I needed to be in the cockpit immediately to begin pre-flight checks with the first officer. My crew was waiting. My aircraft. I looked down at the cheap, flimsy ticket stub for 45A, and then back up at the first-class curtain closing just ahead of me. The time for quiet protest was over. The time for the professional to take over was now. I took one last, long breath of the stale economy air, feeling the shame settle deep, ready to fuel the coming storm. I stood up, quietly. No fanfare. I pulled the cockpit access code card, my official captain's ID, from my wallet, gripping the plastic tightly. I had delayed just long enough. It was time to go to work. The curtain to first class was merely 10 steps away. What happened next would be loud. The roar of the engines tried to drown out the ringing in my ears. I was compressed into seat 38B. The cheap fabric scratched my skin. I was sitting in coach. The seat I had purchased, the comfortable haven I earned, was now being occupied by some oblivious passenger, enjoying the view from 1A. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Every vibration of the chassis was a pulse of shame. I kept seeing the look on the gate agent's face, that dismissive tilt of the head, the way she handled the ticket, not like a boarding pass, but like evidence of fraud. She had called security, not because I was aggressive, but because I demanded the dignity that came with the ticket. "We have to protect our premium-paying customers," she'd sneered, her voice dripping with superior pity. She didn't believe I was a premium-paying customer. She didn't believe I belonged there at all. This wasn't about the champagne or the extra legroom. It was the absolute fundamental rejection of my presence in a space they had decided was not mine to occupy. I closed my eyes. I recited the checklist for an aborted takeoff. A deep breath. I needed to separate the passenger's pain from the captain's duty, but they were inseparable now. They had humiliated the woman who was responsible for their lives. My mind flew back to flight school, to the day I first touched the heavy controls of a 747 simulator. I remembered the instructor, skeptical, watching me intently. I was the only black woman in my cohort. I knew I had to be flawless in every approach, every calculation, every emergency procedure. I had sacrificed everything for the rigor, the precision, the undeniable authority that came with the four stripes on my shoulder, and they tore it all up over the assumption that I was lying about a seat upgrade. They were about to take off, soaring 30,000 feet into the air, commanded by a ghost captain, because the actual captain was busy nursing a bruised ego in 38B. The realization hit me with cold professional force. They were running late. The crew had been hurried. They must have assumed I was already in the cockpit, going over the pre-flight safety procedures with the first officer. They had no idea the person they insulted minutes ago was the highest authority on this aircraft. I had the power to stop this flight immediately. I could call the tower, declare an emergency, and ground the plane before we ever reached the queue. But that wasn't poetic enough. That was simple procedure. I wanted them to see the consequence of their bias in sharp focus. I wanted the gate agent and the snickering flight attendant to see the reality of who they had dismissed. I needed to make my entry. I slowly reached into the small overhead bin above me. It held only one item, a heavy black garment bag. Inside, pressed and crisp, was my uniform. The white shirt, haqu, tailored jacket, the meticulously polished shoes, the insignia of command. I felt the weight of the 4 gold stripes ready to be pinned to my shoulders. This was not a costume. It was earned armor. My heart was no longer racing from anger. It was beating with slow, deliberate resolve. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on. The first officer's voice crackled over the intercom, running through the final checks. "Cabin crew, please take your seats for departure." I gently unzipped the bag, just enough to pull out the pristine white shirt. I needed 3 minutes. 3 minutes to transform from the ridiculed passenger to the commanding presence. I didn't care about the attention this would draw from the passengers in the back. They were about to witness a necessary disruption. My dignity was not up for negotiation, and neither was the safe command of this aircraft. I rose slowly from seat 38B. My legs felt long and powerful. I held the uniform tightly to my chest. It was time to walk forward and introduce myself to my crew. The taste of ash was thick in my mouth. I stood there for a long moment, watching Marcus bask in the applause of the handful of complicit travelers who celebrated my humiliation. He was preening, unaware he had just signed his own professional execution order. I didn't react, not visibly. I didn't scream or cry. I just turned my back on the gate and walked, head high, toward the staff-only corridor near the administrative offices. I had to find the switch. I had to turn Aisha, the outraged passenger, back into Captain Johnson. My hands were shaking, but my mind was laser-focused. The injustice was a wound, but it was also fuel. I found a small, unused staff cubicle. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air conditioning and the smell of cheap toner. I pulled out my secure airline communication device. This was no longer a personal complaint. This was an immediate critical incident report. I dialed Flight Operations Director Frank Miller. His voice crackled with routine energy. "Miller. Frank, this is Captain Johnson, Flight 808 to Paris. I am calling to report a hostile and professionally unacceptable incident." There was a noticeable shift in his breathing. Frank knew my tone. I didn't use that tone unless the wings were falling off the plane. "Captain, what's going on? Are you not on board yet?" "I am at the gate. I was just prevented from boarding by gate agent Marcus Davies. He racially profiled me, accused me of holding a fraudulent ticket, and physically destroyed my first-class boarding pass, calling me a low-class thief." The line was silent for 3 agonizing seconds. I could hear the gears grinding in Frank's head. He knew the protocol instantly. Assaulting a passenger is bad. Assaulting a captain moments before she commands a heavy transatlantic flight is catastrophic. Did he know who you were, Captain?" Frank's voice was now thin, edged with panic. He saw the name Aisha Johnson on the ticket, Frank. He saw a black woman in jeans. That was enough for him. I continued, my voice steady, professional, utterly devoid of emotion. I need Marcus Davies, immediately relieved of duty at Gate 12. He is a liability and a potential safety risk. I cannot and will not command an aircraft that has been compromised by the unchecked bigotry of a ground crew member. I was leveraging everything, my rank, my record, and the immense liability he had just created for the airline. Frank didn't argue. He knew that if I walked away right now, Flight 808 would be delayed for hours, costing the company millions, and the resulting lawsuit would be fatal. Consider it done, Captain. I'm sending a security detail right now. We are deeply sorry for this outrageous behavior. Save the apologies, Frank. Just handle the paperwork. I have a flight to prep. I hung up. The rage was still simmering, but now it was contained, locked down behind a shield of necessary professionalism. I stepped out of the cubicle, pulling my suitcase behind me. Just as I reached the main administration hall, Mr. Henderson, the terminal manager, came jogging around the corner. He was sweating. His tie was slightly crooked. He'd clearly been listening to the operations call. He didn't greet me with the usual, "Captain Johnson, how are you?" He rushed straight into damage control, his hands fluttering nervously. "Captain, Aisha, please allow me to apologize profusely for this catastrophic misunderstanding. Marcus is a new employee, poorly trained. We are taking immediate steps." I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. My eyes met his. I saw genuine fear there. Not fear for me, but fear of the press release, the stock drop, the lawsuit. "Mr. Henderson," I said, and the coolness in my voice must have been terrifying. There was no misunderstanding. I was clearly identified as a first-class passenger. I was deliberately humiliated, and my property was destroyed by your employee because of the color of my skin. He tried to step closer, to pat my arm perhaps, to convey false sincerity. I took a deliberate step back. "I am not here as a customer seeking compensation, Mr. Henderson. I am here as Captain Johnson, reporting gross professional misconduct that directly impacts the safety and integrity of my flight crew and my aircraft." His apologies sounded like static. "We will ensure he is terminated immediately, Captain. We can offer you significant compensation, a premium upgrade. Anything you need?" "I don't need an upgrade, Mr. Henderson," I interrupted sharply. "I had the ticket I paid for. I need accountability, and I need to secure my flight deck." I looked pointedly down the hall toward Gate 12, where I could already see a stern-faced security officer approaching Marcus. "I need assurance that Marcus Davies is escorted off the property and banned from accessing any operational area permanently before I set foot in that cockpit." It was an ultimatum. They couldn't refuse. I held all the cards now. "It is done, Captain. Absolutely done." Henderson wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. I gave him a curt nod. The immediate crisis was handled. The corporate panic was set in motion, but the ultimate justice was still waiting at Gate 12. I walked past Henderson and headed toward the flight crew briefing room. It was time to shed the jeans and the pain. It was time to put on the uniform. I could feel the weight of the 4 gold stripes in my carry-on bag. They were not just stripes of rank. They were stripes of armor. I needed to brief my first officer, confirm the flight plan, and take my place. But first, Marcus and those passengers needed to see exactly who they had torn up that ticket for. I closed the door to the briefing room. The transformation was beginning. I could hear the faint sound of boarding announcements outside. They were about to call the final names for Flight 808, and I was about to make the most memorable entrance of my career. The paper they tore wasn't just my ticket. It was a mirror reflecting their deepest, ugliest assumptions. They didn't see a first-class passenger. They saw a trespasser. They saw a threat to the established order they believed in. I sat in the quiet isolation of the crew ready room, breathing slowly, staring at the crumpled white strip of cardstock. The paper was worthless now, just trash. But the insult was not. The attempt to deny my reality, my right to exist in that space of achievement, was permanent. I thought of my father. His words always echoed when I faced resistance. They can question your intentions, Amara, but never let them question your competence. Competence. That was the only currency I would trade in now. I reached for the garment bag hanging on the door. It held the uniform, starched, pressed, and waiting for duty. Putting on the white shirt felt like shedding a civilian skin that had failed to protect me. The 4 gold bars on the epaulets felt cool, heavy, and grounding. I was no longer the humiliated passenger. I was Captain Amara Jones, the commander of this aircraft. I checked the manifest again on the secure company tablet. Flight 387. My flight plan. My responsibility. Every soul on that plane, including the smug passenger in 1A, was now under my absolute command. I could hear the distant noise of the pre-flight checks starting. Time was essential. I took one final look at my reflection. Gone was the weary traveler seeking rest. In her place was the officer. Calm, precise, utterly unwavering. I contacted operations on the headset. My voice was level, professional, devoid of the earlier stress. Operations, this is Captain Amara Jones. I am en route to the gate. I need immediate confirmation on the status of my entire flight crew and the gate personnel who processed the initial boarding. The ops manager sounded startled. Captain Jones, we had a small incident at the gate with a passenger who seemed confused about their seating. Gate agent Jennifer handled it. I am aware of the incident, operations, I replied, clipping my words. I require the full names of every gate agent, supervisor, and customer service representative involved in the boarding process for Flight 387 in the last 30 minutes. Email it directly to my secured terminal. Now. The silence on the other end was absolute. He knew this was not standard procedure. I slung the heavy leather flight bag over my shoulder. It carried not just charts, but absolute authority. I walked out of the sterile crew area and turned down the long, bright corridor leading directly back to the main terminal, back to Gate A44. I saw Jennifer, the gate agent, standing behind the counter. She was laughing with her supervisor, Mark, clearly recounting the tale of their victory. They looked like schoolyard bullies who had won a trivial fight. They hadn't seen me coming in this capacity, not like this. I stopped 10 feet away, letting the silence of my presence override their petty conversation. My polished black shoes clicked on the marble floor. The sound was sharp, confident, the sound of someone who owned the space. Jennifer looked up first. Her smile froze mid-giggle. The noise of the terminal faded into a dull hum. Her eyes darted wildly from my face, which she had just scorned, down to the 4 wide gold stripes wrapped around my cuffs, then up to the wings pinned proudly on my chest. The smugness evaporated from her face, replaced by a dawning, terrible comprehension. The color drained from Mark's cheeks. He straightened up slowly, recognizing the uniform, recognizing the rank. "Captain," Mark whispered, the arrogance entirely gone, replaced by sudden, crippling dread. He hadn't yet put the pieces together. He hadn't realized which captain I was. I didn't answer him. I walked straight past the gate counter, stepping directly onto the jet bridge. Jennifer stammered, trying to find her voice. "Ma'am, you can't... Captain, identification, please. Only authorized personnel past this point." I stopped at the threshold of the pressurized cabin, turning back to face the pair of them. They were pale shadows of the power-tripping staff they had been moments ago. I reached into the pocket of my immaculate jacket. I pulled out my official FAA pilot certification and my company ID. I did not hand them the cards. I placed them deliberately on the counter between them, precisely where the torn pieces of my first class ticket had been discarded earlier. My voice was low, colder than the high atmosphere we would soon fly through. My identification, I said, and as the commander of Flight 387, I assure you, I am precisely where I am authorized to be. I paused, letting the full weight of my command settle upon them. There has been a change in crew assignments, I announced, loud enough for nearby remaining passengers to hear clearly. I need both of you, Agent Jennifer and Supervisor Mark, to stand down immediately. They started to protest, fear twisting their features, but I raised one hand, palm out, a silent, absolute demand for silence. Do not touch another passenger manifest or gate system, I continued. My eyes locked on Mark's. Effective immediately, you are both suspended pending investigation of regulatory non-compliance and gross misconduct. I had the job they couldn't touch. I had the power they couldn't fathom. I didn't wait for their response. I had served the justice. Now I had a duty to perform. I stepped onto the aircraft, feeling the familiar hum of the massive machine awaiting my guidance. But first, I needed to locate one particular passenger, the one who had gotten my seat. I knew exactly where he was sitting. Seat 1A, my seat. And I knew exactly how I was going to address him. The real flight preparation was about to begin. The manager's hurried apology was cheap. It smelled of stale airport coffee and panic. He dragged Mr. Stevenson, the gate agent, to the edge of the jet bridge. Stevenson wouldn't meet my eye. He just mumbled something about miscommunication, his voice thick with realized consequence. He was trembling, not from cold, but from the sudden, sharp understanding that he had tried to tear down a pillar of the company. I held up my hand, stopping the torrent of weak excuses. I didn't need fury. I needed procedure. Mr. Stevenson, I stated, my voice low and level, amplified by the rigid seriousness of the moment. You actively compromise security protocol by attempting to confiscate and destroy an official airline document. I didn't wait for him to respond. You caused a delay of 47 minutes that will impact the entire routing schedule. Your interaction is now officially a matter for corporate security review, HR, and my personal legal counsel. He flinched as if slapped. I looked at the manager, dismissing Stevenson instantly. My focus is now on the flight. Secure the door, ensure all paperwork is properly sealed, and maintain radio silence unless absolutely critical. They backed away, two men swallowed by their own incompetence, leaving the air tasting clean again. The door sealed behind them. I walked into the cockpit, my boots heavy on the polished floor. This was the threshold where all the noise of the terminal, all the insults of the past hour faded away. This was my sanctuary. This was my office. The familiar scent of warm electronics, hydraulic fluid, and crisp oxygen filled my lungs. I sank into the captain's seat. It molded perfectly to my back. It was always waiting for me. The headset went on first. It was the armor I put on every single time. Once that mic was live, I was no longer a person defined by their skin tone or their ancestry. I was authority. I was the mission. My first officer, a competent young man named Ethan, looked at me with renewed respect, maybe a little awe. "Captain," he nodded, his voice steady. "Everything green for pre-flight checklist. Just waiting on your sign-off." I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders drop, releasing the tightness that Stevenson's ignorance had coiled there. "Run the checks, Ethan," I instructed. My hands moved over the controls, light and decisive. Every switch, every dial, every indicator light responded instantly to my touch. This wasn't just a job. This was a language I had spent 20 years learning to speak fluently. The language of physics, aerodynamics, and absolute control. I looked out the window. The tarmac was bathed in the harsh yellow glow of the runway lights. And then I saw him, Stevenson. He was standing near the wing root, ostensibly supervising the ground crew, but his posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on the glowing cabin. He couldn't see me clearly, but he knew I was there. He knew the person he had belittled, the person whose seat he had physically denied, was now the one holding the lives of every passenger, including his own manager's future, in her hands. That visual confirmation, that forced witnessing of my power, was the first taste of true justice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was simply undeniable truth. I remembered my grandmother's words when I got my first pilot's license, framed on a brittle piece of paper. They can tear up your paper, Jada, but they cannot tear up your wings. I felt a quiet, hard certainty settle in my chest. The pain of the humiliation was still there, a dull ache, but it was being overwritten by the roar of the massive twin engines beginning to spin up to life. My hands were on the throttles. I was ready. I reached for the PA microphone. Tower, this is Skywing 17, requesting clearance for pushback. The voice in my ear was crisp and immediate. The relationship was transactional, professional. No judgment, no profile. Just command and response. Skywing 17, pushback approved. Stand by for taxi. I released the brakes. The massive aircraft shuddered gently, a giant awakening. Then I keyed the cabin intercom. My voice filled the cabin, calm, professional, authoritative, reaching every single passenger, especially those seated in first class, who had been so quick to judge the previous hour. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. I paused, letting the silence hold the weight of my presence. The same voice they heard arguing on the jet bridge was now the only voice that mattered. We welcome you aboard Flight 17 to Madrid. We sincerely apologize for the slight delay we experienced during pre-boarding preparations. I leaned into the microphone, adding a subtle emphasis that only the people who had witnessed the scene would understand. We have taken all necessary steps to ensure that every aspect of this flight adheres to the absolute highest standards of safety, professionalism, and mutual respect. I gave the technical details, the altitude, the weather forecast, all routine, delivered with flawless command. We thank you for flying with us today. Sit back, relax, and let's fly. I flicked the mic off. Ethan was already running the taxi briefing. He knew better than to ask about the incident now. We were in the operational bubble. I pushed the throttles forward. The heavy aircraft began to roll smoothly toward the runway. I was flying, and I was bringing every single minute of that injustice with me. The flight itself was proof against their profiling. I was the living, breathing, 60-ton rebuttal to their arrogance. The only remaining question was not if I would deliver them safely, but what I would do with Stevenson and his managers when we landed. They thought the humiliation was over. They were very wrong. We reached the runway hold line. The jet engines roared louder now, ready to consume the runway. Justice was about to lift off. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Stone, who had just minutes ago held the absolute power of the gate, looked less like a manager and more like a melted wax figurine. His face was colorless. The agents beside him looked down at their polished shoes, trying to disappear into the carpet. I didn't have to raise my voice. The 4 gold stripes on my epaulets were speaking for me, broadcasting my rank with terrifying clarity. My gaze settled on Stone, hard and unwavering. You tore up the first-class ticket belonging to Captain Ava Williams, I stated, my voice dangerously level. You then threatened her with security, based on your belief that a black woman could not afford that seat. He stuttered, trying to regain control, trying to build a bridge back to reality. Captain, I didn't know who you were. You should have identified yourself. This is protocol. The sheer arrogance of his demand, that I must announce my job just to deserve basic human respect, was the final insult. My identification is irrelevant to your obligation to treat paying customers with dignity, I countered, stepping closer. My job requires me to identify myself to the tower, not to the gate agent who decides my worth based on my skin tone. Just then, the high-pitched urgency of power shuffling arrived. Miss Chen, the station director, burst through the service door, trailed by two wide-eyed security personnel. Chen was usually a woman of icy composure, but the sight of a halted international flight and the captain in the middle of a confrontation shattered her professional mask. Captain Williams, what is the meaning of this? Why is boarding halted? She demanded, focusing purely on the operational delay. I turned my back on Stone, addressing the only person who held immediate corporate authority. Miss Chen, I am reporting an intentional, racially motivated security incident that directly interfered with my pre-flight preparation and caused significant emotional distress, I articulated, using the precise, sterile language of official reports. I held out the fragmented pieces of my torn ticket. Chen's eyes, trained to see legal liability, immediately went from my uniform to the scraps of thermal paper in my hand. She understood instantly that this wasn't an argument about a seat. It was evidence of professional misconduct and potentially a crippling lawsuit. This man, Mr. Stone, physically destroyed my personal property and falsely accused me of being a ticket scammer attempting to slip past the gate, I continued. Chen spun around to face Stone, the temperature in the room dropping by 10 degrees. Stone, panicking, tried to appeal to her, his voice cracking with fear. Chen, look, I just followed the rules. She looked suspicious. She was wearing a hoodie. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. His frantic words, suspicious hoodie didn't look like, were the nails in his own coffin. He was admitting the profile right in front of the executive, using the very prejudices he should have been concealing. Chen didn't even afford him a response. She signaled the head of security with a tiny, sharp movement of her chin. Mr. Stone, you are immediately suspended without pay, pending a full internal and legal review, Chen declared, her voice now flat and absolute. Gather your belongings and report to Human Resources at Oro 900 tomorrow morning. You are to leave the premises now. Stone's face crumpled. His immediate justice had arrived, not by my hand, but by the swift, cold logic of the corporation protecting itself. You can't do this. I've been here 15 years. She's lying. This is retaliation, he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. The two security guards gently but firmly took his arms. I am not lying, Mr. Stone, I said softly, watching the entitlement drain away from him as he was escorted out. And I am not seeking retaliation. I am seeking accountability. I turned back to Miss Chen, who was visibly trembling, knowing that this incident would haunt her own performance review. I need every minute of CCTV footage from this gate and the immediate ticket counter area secured immediately, I commanded, my captain's voice returning, professional and unwavering. I need the names and statements of the other agents involved, and I need a formal apology delivered to my legal counsel within 24 hours. Chen nodded numbly, scrambling to delegate the cleanup operation. The irony was heavy and bitter. In uniform, I had instant protection and authority. 5 minutes ago, in my own clothes, I was trash they could sweep aside. I felt a profound, exhausting sadness wash over the rush of vindication. The uniform should not have been necessary for me to be treated like a human being. I will be proceeding to the cockpit now, I told Chen. I need to file the mandatory pre-flight incident report. I will not discuss this matter further until after the flight lands safely. I knew the paperwork would be devastating. A flight safety incident involving the captain minutes before departure, stemming from racially profiled humiliation, was grounds for termination and a civil suit for significant damages. But my duty called. The jet engine noise was already a hum I could feel in my chest. I took one deep, necessary breath, allowing the brief moment of quiet pain to pass. Then I turned and walked toward the jetway, the four stripes on my shoulder leading the way. I had to fly this plane, but I knew that while I was navigating the Atlantic skies tonight, my lawyers would be navigating the legal statutes back on the ground, preparing for a landing much harder than any my jet would make. The systemic battle was just beginning, and I wouldn't stop until every consequence Mr. Stone and the airline deserved had been delivered. The moment arrived, not with a shout, but with the slow, deliberate turning of the heavy cockpit door. Thompson was still shouting at the security guard, demanding I be removed. Brenda was adjusting her name tag, trying to look professional while vibrating with righteous fury. They were waiting for the humiliated passenger they thought I was. The fraud, the trespasser. They did not know who they were waiting for. I stepped out of the flight deck. Slowly. The light in the terminal was harsh, but it caught the glint of my epaulets. I was wearing the crisp white shirt, the black tie, the unmistakable deep navy blue blazer, and on my shoulders 4 bands of thick braided gold. 4 stripes. Thompson stopped mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open, slightly wet. Brenda's hand flew to her own mouth, muffling a sound of pure terror. I did not have to speak. The uniform spoke for me. It demanded obedience. It commanded the terminal. Thompson looked down at the scraps of first-class ticket he still gripped in his hand. Then he looked up at the 4 stripes. The color drained from his face until he was the pale gray of cheap boarding pass paper. "Captain Hayes," I stated, my voice low. It was the voice I used to talk down turbulence or manage engine failure. It was calm, incisive. I pointed at the flight deck entrance. "You are currently obstructing the required pre-flight procedures of the pilot in command. This is a federal offense." Brenda stumbled backward, hitting the gate desk. She started to mumble something about a mistake, about confusion. I didn't look at her. I fixed my eyes on Thompson, the supervisor who thought my success could only be fraud. "Supervisor Thompson," I continued, "you intentionally damaged company property, a paid, valid ticket, and racially profiled a paying customer based purely on bias." He finally found his voice, a squeak of denial. "Ma'am, I didn't know." "You didn't know," I repeated, the echo of his presumption hanging in the air. "That is precisely the problem, isn't it? You assumed you knew exactly who I was because of the color of my skin." I reached into my blazer pocket, pulling out my official crew manifest and my airline ID. The photo was unmistakable. The title, boldly printed, "Captain A. Hayes." "You didn't know, but you acted with absolute confidence in your ignorance," I said. I looked at the security guard, who was now utterly paralyzed. "Officer," I commanded, "please contact Chief Pilot Operations immediately. Report that Captain Hayes requires Gate Agent Miller and Supervisor Thompson to be escorted off premises. They are immediately suspended pending a full HR investigation into gross misconduct and discrimination." Thompson tried to plead. He held out the mangled ticket scraps like an offering. "Captain, please, this is my career." "You tore up my seat, Thompson," I cut him off sharply. "You dismissed my worth entirely. Did you think about my career then? Did you think about the 20 years I spent earning those stripes?" He fell silent. The silence was louder than any screaming match. It was the sound of a system checking itself. I turned my back on them. I walked back into the cockpit. where the flight engineer and first officer were trying very hard to look only at their instruments. They knew the score. I sat in the command chair. I placed my hands on the yoke. "We are running 6 minutes late," I announced to my crew, the professional cadence returning, due to unforeseen ground personnel issues. The door was closed. The ground crew pushed us back. We were moving. As we taxied out, passing the brightly lit terminal windows, I saw Thompson and Brenda standing beside a police officer, their heads bowed low. They looked small, exposed. It wasn't a fireable offense to mistakenly check a ticket, but it was absolutely fireable to assume that a black woman in first class must be cheating and then destroy company property to prove a racist hypothesis. The surveillance footage would be devastating. The injustice they heaped upon me was monumental. The poetic justice was quieter. It didn't need confrontation. It only needed my competence. I took the mic. "Good evening, passengers. This is your captain speaking. We apologize for the slight delay. We are cleared for takeoff and anticipate a smooth flight to our destination. I look forward to flying you there safely." I pulled back the throttles. The power surged. The aircraft sped down the runway. I wasn't flying for revenge. I was flying to prove them irrelevant. They tore up my ticket. They tried to tear down my dignity, but they could not tear down the captain. I lifted the plane off the ground, into the sky, where the only color that matters is blue. And up here, I was in command. Always. The story was over. The journey had begun.